Good afternoon, everyone. 5 p.m. here at the Into the Absurd virtually existential dinner conversation. I am your host, Tina Brock, and I am thrilled to be coming to you during the Fringe Festival when we would normally be experiencing theater on stage with you. We are here to share in the very real world the passions and the creations of people in the community and around the country who are doing really, really interesting things. So on today's show, David Fox and Cameron Kelsall, you know them as arts journalists and critics here in Philadelphia and New York, and we'll talk to them about some of the really interesting work that they're doing on Parterre Box and also on recliningstandards.com in just a minute. But I want to just welcome all of you who are here coming in on the Zoom link. If you are part of the IRC's mailing list, you get an email link every week. If you're not, head on over to the IRC's page or website and sign up for that mailing list. And you can also join us as we stream Facebook Live every week. And for past episodes, head on over to the IRC's YouTube page where we've cataloged all the conversations that we've been having since June, and we will be here at 5 p.m. for the foreseeable future, just digging into what it means to create, to be alive, to be in this existential time that we are in. I want to say a big thank you to Bob Schmidt and Erica Holscher, part of the IRC team, who are making this show possible today. And we are so welcome you and your questions here. If you join in the conversation today on Zoom or also on Facebook, you can put those questions for David and Cameron in the chat, and we'll get to them over this next 15 minutes. David Fox and Cameron Kelsall, you know them as critics here in Philadelphia, and I became really interested in the work they were doing, both pre-pandemic and post, in their look at classic films and actors and stars, and just the way in which they write together about classic films and theater on stage. And it's those conversations that I am so interested in and look forward to every week, and have been such a boon personally during this time. So I thought, let's kick off the Fringe in a big way. They would normally be in the audience right now reviewing your shows, and so I thought, let's have them to the virtual table. And I guess I should mention that I'm coming to you from a location which was Bette Davis's apartment at one time, and that is in the Colonial House in West Hollywood. I thought that would be a dramatic place to welcome two very dramatic and interesting writers to the table. So let me welcome David Fox and Cameron Kelsall into the Absurd.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Tina.
Hi. Do you like my background?
I love your background.
And
I'm going to just interject that I lived about half a mile from that apartment building. Definitely the downscale half a mile. My part was the downscale part, but I passed that building all the time. I knew she lived there, and I always sort of hoped for a sneak peek. Never got it, but yeah.
Apparently the inside of it is extraordinary. I did some research on it, and apparently I also read the story where when she first came with her mother, I guess, they were living in an apartment that was not far from this one. So she had a special love of this one, I guess, when it was on the market. And so it felt like a dramatic place to.
It's a spectacular Art Deco building. There are two or three of them right around that particular part of West Hollywood, and it's actually one of the things that I occasionally miss about my life there.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into that, your life in Los Angeles, David, in a couple of minutes. I start really about the impetus for you both, and we'll put links up during the conversation. So everybody, if you have not gone over to Parterre Box or to Reclining Standards, do it. These weekly conversations are just a joy. And if you're a classic film and or theater that has been filmed, go back and dig up the past episodes. But tell me, I'll throw this question out to either one of you guys, how did you decide to begin having these conversations?
Well, I think today is literally 6 months to the day from when theater stopped in New York, and then gradually in Philadelphia and pretty much everywhere else in the country. And David and I were writing pretty much up until the very last minute. We were together at a show literally the night before. And so we spent the first couple of days after that wrapping up the assignments that we already had writing. And we were kind of in a position where we didn't really know what the future was going to hold, but we knew that for at least the next month, there was going to be nothing to review live in terms of theater, in terms of any kind of live performance. So we didn't want to stop writing, and we started to have conversations over Zoom and talking about what we might pivot to in the meantime if live theater wasn't an option. We started by thinking about some things that we had wanted to write about for a long time, and we actually started by thinking we were going to look at some filmed versions of classic plays. Specifically, the first thing I think we wrote about was a kind of famous production of Chekhov's Three Sisters from the Actors Studio from the 1960s that had Kim Stanley and Geraldine Page and Sandy Dennis and Shelley Winters, and that kind of, and so we went from there and thought, okay, we did Three Sisters. What other Chekhov plays do we want to write about? What other playwrights do we want to write about? And we kind of spiraled through a bunch of different things. And then it's probably like around the beginning of June when we started to think about classic film, which is something that we've had a lot of conversations about over the years, but we've never really written about. And we had this, amount of time to fill and digital space to fill. So we started kind of brainstorming about what we wanted who we would want to write about, who are some of the stars we would want to write about, what are some of the films that we would want to write about. If we're going to write about somebody like Bette Davis or Katherine Hepburn or Joan Crawford, what are the films from that person's filmography that are essential and what's interesting to look at. So it's been an ever evolving, since March 12th, 2020, it's been an evolving journey. But I think at this point we've written close to, maybe 30 or 40 things. And, just as there seems to be no real end in sight for the current pause in live entertainment, there seems to be no end in sight of the things that we can touch on. So it's been really, it's been a really challenging and interesting way to fill this time and to keep writing and to keep our writing relationship going.
And it's so comforting to be able to catch up on films that maybe we've seen a long time ago. There's just been something very rewarding about being immersed in that with your conversation alongside. David, tell me about the process of, I'm interested both in the way that, because you often will see theater together, right? You'll see a show together.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that. I guess we can talk about that in a little while and stay on the films for right now. How does the process work for you? Do you watch together separately? How do you,
well, I suppose
how is the viewing?
we watch separately. I mean, I think there probably are some technologies that allow for streaming together, but that's not how we do it. I would only add, by the way, to what Cameron said, that one of the discoveries for me in the early stages of the first few weeks, when I was really looking for things to do, I realized that I don't get my cable package doesn't have a HD version of Turner Classic Movies, but I realized that there was a way I could get that through their website. And I came to realize that there was this whole library of Turner Classic Movies streaming materials. So one of the things I think I decided to kind of spend some time on was both revisiting things that I had seen years before and loved, but also, I think of myself as having seen quite a lot of movies over a long period of time, and movies from the classic era as well, early classics, but there's plenty that I missed. And so part of the discovery for me was a chance to, as I say, visit and revisit and get acquainted with material. So no, we basically, I think the way this has usually worked is that we commit to a certain time frame. We're going to be watching this within 2 or 3 days. And we have a kind of vague plan in mind, but actually one of the most interesting things to me has been sort of what leads to what. So the evolution of the topics really has in some ways been, sort of links from one thing to another. So
you mean the curation of what you guys decide to do?
Yeah, that's a very nice way of putting it. It's often, because it feels actually a bit more random than that sometimes, but it's actually, that's part of the charm of it for me. So for example, I can't remember exactly how we went from Three Sisters to, we did a glass menagerie sequence. I do actually, in my mind, sort of both in my kind of love affair with theater, I put Tennessee Williams and Chekhov often together as two playwrights that I discovered early on and loved. But we ended up doing the glass menagerie, one of the versions on film. One of the versions of that we did was a sort of made-for-TV movie with Katherine Hepburn, and that led to our thinking about Katherine Hepburn as a performer and a performer who's done plays. So I think we went from that to Delicate Balance, and then sort of, so we've evolved. We are now actually in a world where we're doing some, what I think of as pure film, meaning not specifically stage adaptations, but movies.
The last couple with Bette Davis and Katherine Hepburn.
And happily, I think one of the things that has also come out of this strange world that we live in is that editors are looking for expanded ways to market their own website. So Parterre Box, which I think we've talked about this a little bit before on the show, but Parterre Box was an opera blog, essentially opera website. And we kind of kept pushing it a little further toward theater, starting with musical theater, kind of crossover, almost opera, then into more popular musical theater. And now we've sort of, I think it's been a great mutual experience for Parterre to explore new areas, but also for us to have that as a venue. We really do, I would say, we'll come up with some ideas and then we'll watch, and then sometimes I would say more often than not, we'll have some back and forth exchange by messenger, just sometimes while we're watching, sometimes just a few comments. But I would say it's also been kind of interesting that occasionally we'll literally enter the writing room, which is what I think of as the Zoom conversation where we work together, without having discussed a movie, and really kind of discover in the moment what each of us thought about it, which is kind of fun. So in some cases, we don't have any pre-planning about what we're going to write. We just get there and explore and decide who's going to, and we generally just decide who's going to write the opening. I mean, if one of us wants a particular thing, we'll do it. But otherwise, it's just, we'll switch off.
So is one, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's probably been, if you're asking about that's probably the biggest difference, because under normal circumstances, when we're co-reviewing live events, 95% of the time you're seeing it together. You're talking at intermission, you're talking after the show, you're talking at dinner, you're talking as you walk home.
In our case, we also have a fairly long commute if we're doing New York theater. So we have often sort of talked a review through just in the drive home.
So when you're talking about it, it's sort of your thoughts and ideas in the same way that you do it in the Zoom room when you're doing this project. But does that conversation inform and or change what you might write about?
Well,
I think theater.
I mean, I think it can start out the same way that any two people who go see to a show would have a conversation after they see it. It certainly, I don't think it really changes opinions or feelings, but it's a great way to synthesize what you're taking away from something. A lot of times you don't leave it, a lot of times you don't leave something with a fully formed opinion ready to go as you're walking out the door. And so, talking through something can really be helpful and kind of take an idea that's kind of germinating and get it to be fully realized. So especially when you're going to be writing with another person, I think it's really helpful to put some shape into what the piece is going to look like, and so that it's not just going to be sort of a random assemblage of back and forth, that it really is going to actually feel like both a conversation and a cohesive piece of writing,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we aim for as well. You know, we would like it to be essentially as cohesive as something that is more traditionally structured and written by one person.
Do you tend to find that you notice the same things coming into it? I mean, like, um, or do you tend to focus on different things?
I would say that if anything is a challenge, I mean, I think Cameron and I have had almost from the start, but of course it's evolved, a pretty easy process. I have co-written once or twice with other people, and it hasn't been as smooth as this. I would say if there's any issue, in some ways you kind of want some disagreement or some different focus, because that can be a good springboard for stuff. But occasionally we're so similar that it's almost, okay, so like you don't want, like, Cameron writes a paragraph and then I say, I agree. And then I write a paragraph and he says he agrees. That's not an interesting way to think or write. So we try to find
what's different about the thing you agree about.
Yeah. But I think it's hard to describe. I feel like there are certain things I think we often zero in on the same way, and some aspects where we're just a little bit different. And that's kind of how we set the discussion up.
Do you surprise yourselves, or did you surprise yourselves when you started this, that you're generationally different? You come in from a different point. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Did you imagine, or would you think your opinions would be different because of that?
Well, I think just by virtue of having different life experiences and being, more aware to different things at different times, that's part of it. And not only that, but that it comes into play in some reviews when we're looking at things from generational perspectives, which is something that we've done in several reviews in the past. We are of different generations, but we have, I have a lot of, we have a lot of overlapping interests, obviously. I have an interest in classic film, and David is very adventurous, and getting up to date with more current things as well, that I might have more familiarity with because it's closer to my own generation. But no, I think of anything that's an advantage.
Do you find the same with when you review opera? Are you generally aligned?
No, I actually don't think so. We tend to prefer different styles, different genres in music, I would say, more than anything else. So, and we actually don't do it. We actually haven't done a ton of joint opera reviewing, although we literally just wrote something that was based on a streaming event.
By literally, we mean like 2 hours ago.
Yeah. Oh, 2 hours ago?
Yeah,
what was the thing you... Oh, okay. Because didn't you write one recently that was a streaming? Wasn't it 2 students or...
Yeah. So the Met is doing this cycle of recitals by their, or sort of concerts by different Met stars. And this was Joyce DiDonato, and this is a Parterre assignment. And so this one we actually did, we weren't together we weren't streaming it together, but we were watching it in the live feed at the same time and sending a few comments back and forth. But yes, it's certainly true for staged opera that we haven't done much together. And I think our tastes in singers are often similar. We like a lot of the same singers, not always, but yes, musically, I'm probably more inclined to like a traditional Italian bel canto of the mid 19th century is a favorite genre of mine, and I think not so much of Cameron's. He's much more adventurous about modern and contemporary work than I tend to be. I have fairly conservative musical taste, I would say.
Something that I really appreciate, and it reminded me in your reviews recently, is in particularly the Bette Davis of Human Bondage, and sort of the depth with which you are able to illuminate and be specific about performance, particularly, I mean, certainly in theater, but also in film. And I enjoyed reading about and have looked into then stars that I didn't know before, the young star, and then the woman who played the mother in was it Betty Davis's mother, and
Gladys Cooper.
Yeah, and sort of leads you on to discovery of new performers. David, do you have a for both of you, do you have a pretty extensive film history that you rely on, or do you do a lot of research when you're reviewing?
I would say I have a pretty extensive back catalog of film viewing, but I would also say that there are huge lacunae, and some of them embarrassing, like things that I should have seen 30 or 40 years ago that I never have. And to some extent, I'm correcting that now. Back to one of your points, I want to say, for me, I think the theater has always been first and foremost about acting. I think that's the thing I love most about it. And I feel like I'm always very disappointed when reviews don't focus on that. And I think it's gotten to be fairly frequent with film reviewing, particularly reviewing of contemporary film, where there are so many things to talk about, that it hardly ever gets mentioned, or only very barely. And so I really thought, when I look at a movie, I want to look, we choose our movies in large part because of the actors.
Well, and especially I think when you're looking at people like Katherine Hepburn, Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, people who are, generally kind of Vivian Leigh, people who are, sort of credited with kind of essentially inventing what Hollywood acting was in the 30s and 40s. It seems like, how could you not talk about performances? I mean, the saying has always been, right, that film is a director's medium and the stage is an actor's medium. But, just as there are stage directors who are very assertive with their concepts, I think there are actors like Bette Davis who are just absolutely, it's unavoidable. And how can you not talk about what they're doing on the screen, for sure.
What is fun is to read the points that you make and then go back either in the clip or because I think you included clips in the of Human Bondage. Well, most of them.
That's
right?
Thanks to James, who does a lot of the setup and the legwork, and is himself a fantastic film buff. So
it's so great because if you talk about the change that she makes over the course of the film, and then you get the clip that really demonstrates that, where she's at is it the loom, or she's making something there in the beginning of the film, and then she. I think I'm referencing the right one.
Yeah, no, that's
and then
right.
Later on, so you really get this illustration, an example of what you guys are talking about, and that I find it's always so informative and just like a history lesson. Let me ask you about this. I'm definitely jumping ship here to the Whales of August, the one that you did recently, and one of the comments, and I don't remember, you'll know who made it, that it was rather inert, that for all that you enjoyed about it, it was inert. And I wondered about that. What was it about, do you think, that rendered it that way for you?
Well, I mean, kind of, to put it in a nutshell, it's a movie where just not very much happens. And I often think that in a film more than in a play, that kind of atmospheric aspect of kind of very tightly contained drama where there really isn't that much happening, that much going on, any big revelations, any big moments. It doesn't stretch as far on film, in my opinion, as it does in theater, where entire works can be built around sort of quiet, introspective moments, and how that's playing to the audience that's actually in the room. So I certainly felt that in The Whales of August, you get sort of these remarkable performances from Bette Davis and Lillian Gish at the very ends of their careers, and a lot of characterful acting, and a lot of, and if you have that background on both of those actresses, to go back to sort of what role they played in the very beginning of the film industry, it's kind of fascinating to watch. But the film itself is kind of dull, and you know, it's not a movie with big revelations going on and big,
Yeah.
outsized performances.
Well, I would say outsized is an interesting kind of segue here, because I would say one of the things that one notices about this, and it's a fact of life that those two actors at that stage in their career, Bette Davis was younger than Gish, but also kind of severely compromised by a stroke, that there were some limitations. I think speed, actors in a way, like the virtuosity of acting has something to do with size and scale and speed and other kinds of things. And what you were going to get from those two actors was going to be slow and quiet and very contained and not a lot of movement. And so in a way, it was kind of built in that you were going to get these small, detailed works. Now, within that, I think the movie captures some extraordinary moments by both of them. And they both have, even at this stage in their careers, an extraordinary performing intelligence, and I think also tremendous skills and cagey. They know their limitations and they play with them. But I mean, it does a succession of that. And I think, there are a couple of tiny performances in there, sort of cameo performances by young people, but by and large, the entire cast is sort of 70 plus. And so what you're going to get is a different kind of mood and a different kind of rhythm. In some ways, the remarkable performance and the Oscar-nominated performance there is Ann Sothern, who, she's certainly younger than the other two, but she's also still got this sort of buoyant energy. She has difficulty moving around. I think at that point she couldn't walk without a cane, but there's something very kind of bubbly and girlish about her. And so when she comes in, there's this kind of lift, I think, to the movie. But it is, it's a movie about endings. It's a movie about, end of life, and it has this very small repressed quality.
It makes me think of Three Tall Women with Glenda Jackson, and how much, how that power just emanated through the entire theater, and how being in the room, that shared energy, and how we give and receive is such an integral part of that experience. And
well, I don't remember exactly how old Glenda Jackson was, but I would say there was absolutely no sense of any diminishing of resources. In fact, quite the contrary, that there she was acting with two actresses considerably younger. And I thought, that just the level of physical control and energy and focus, the kind of laser focus that she could have, was unbelievable. Would have been extraordinary in a 30-year-old actor.
Yeah. There was, I think it was in the piece you wrote, or maybe it was alluded to, but the sort of thinking back on the concept of the studio system and how, of human bondage was done at a particular time, and how it ushered along or got in the way of. Do you think there were advantages to that on some level, to one actor working or being a part of a system?
Well, I think there are advantages and disadvantages, and obviously, I think the advantage and the disadvantage is that actors were under contract and had to work. Sometimes they would be put into a part that might not seem like a natural fit, and it's brilliant. And sometimes they're put into a part that's not a natural fit because they have a movie that they needed to make and it doesn't work. This is, in the 30s and 40s, some of these actors were making 7 movies a year, which is like unheard of now, and, going from, I think, we were talking about Paul Henreid, who was the Bette Davis co-star in Now Voyager. And I believe literally was filming Casablanca and Now Voyager on adjoining studios and at the same exact time. So like, I mean, that's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Um, and 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 they were and it's kind of a remarkable fact, but that's just the way that things were back then, was that, you know, it was kind of like the equivalent of having, you know, a 9-to-5 job. Being an actor, you you made however many movies, you did what they told you, and, you know, maybe every now and then uh, you got to maybe cash your chip in and say, I want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can negotiate, but actors like Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, Humphrey Bogart, they were basically going from movie to movie. And when you do that, you know, not everything's going to work, and it's not everything's going to be a masterpiece. So I think the interesting thing is to look at people, you know, have the roles that people played that were maybe outside of their comfort zones, and whether that worked or it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you take away from Bette Davis is that, you know, in a succession of movies made very close together, even sometimes when parts seem like they're similar, she finds something interesting to do that's different. One of the things I think I sort of started, I can't remember, this may have actually been in Now Voyager, but I can't remember which of our conversations about her I mentioned this, but I feel like, to me, she sort of she embodies what I think of as the best kind of movie star acting, which is that simultaneously you always know you're watching Bette Davis. There's just something so utterly characterful about her persona. But at the same time, you know, Charlotte Vale does not look like a character, like the character in Of Human Bondage, who does not look like the Dark Victory character, whose name I can't remember anymore. But anyway, there's she really does characterize, but she also fulfills your desire to see this particular actor in a performance. I think one of the good things that can come out of the studio system is also when the studio supported an actor and wanted to kind of showcase them, they understood like who were good actors to pair somebody with, and who were, in the case of Bette Davis, for example, not most of them, but many of her early movies were scored by Max Steiner. As a composer. And I think it was a great pairing. He had a kind of emotionality that I think worked for her, and it just enhanced everything. I think both Cameron and I, made a big point about the Ori Kelly wardrobe that Bette Davis wears, which is one of the truly extraordinary wardrobes ever in film. But you know, the fact is, if Dark Victory had been, if Now Voyager had been designed by another costume designer, we might not have had some of the same feeling of it. And several people that I've talked to about this movie have made specific references to particular costumes that sort of hit them in that movie. The butterfly cape that I think Cameron mentioned, there's a black dress.
That black dress with
so severe
right,
that you almost can't believe anybody would put an actor in it. But
yeah,
you know, it's sort of at the moment when she kind of comes into her own, and she's not taking any crap from anybody, and she's in control, and she softens it herself by putting this little bouquet of camellias on it. But basically she's in charge of her appearance, and she doesn't want it to be frilly. And so I think, you know, these are packages that a studio put together that really enhance every element of the movie.
Mm-hmm. So it's Now Voyager is the one where she makes the transition.
Yes.
Right. I had them confused. Yeah.
Yeah.
So David, I'm interested in the Los Angeles, the Hollywood aspect of your growing up and how that influenced. And your father was an actor?
He was, yes.
And so I'm just interested in your growing up.
Not only an actor, but he is actually in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
He is in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Which is
a movie that we just wrote about recently.
Yeah. Someday I do occasionally contemplate writing a memoir. I don't know who would want to read it, but I would like to write it just as a sort of cathartic experience, because being the child of a sometimes working actor is a kind of a strange experience. I mean, I think people tend to think that my life was very, you know, if you have an actor father, your life is very glamorous. And there were certainly things about my life that were kind of glamorous, but you know, it's also like somebody cannot work for virtually a year, and that's bad. You know, I would say I don't miss living in Los Angeles now, but growing up in it during a particular time when there still was a kind of vestige of old Hollywood, I'm very grateful for that. I think as a child, I wished I were growing up in New York, because New York seemed like the epitome to me of, well, it was theater, and it was also, I don't know, something felt very urban about it in a way that Los Angeles with its sprawl doesn't quite. But now when I look back on it, I think there were some remarkable things about doing that, including just, that one would pass Bette Davis's apartment building like virtually every day of my life. If I drove out of my apartment to go to work or to school, I passed that building. And there was a sense of that as a still living history, I would say, in this, even into the 1970s. So, for example, one of the things I often lament is remembering about my early life in California is Los Angeles. It's a movie town, right? It's an industry town. So, I mean, I would say there were 20 revival houses, that each of which showed a different old movie, and they often showed them for one night each. So, I mean, I spent a huge amount of my life going from theater to theater. And I also remember that even some of the smaller ones would occasionally get actors who were in these movies to show up and give a little after talk. So, I mean, a theater, there was one revival house that was way in sort of in a kind of odd part of Hollywood Boulevard that had virtually nothing on it. I mean, this was like essentially going into a garage, a tiny little theater. But nonetheless, I remember going to showings of movies there where I saw conversations with Eleanor Powell and Tom Drake, movies that had both of them in it. That's like, you couldn't get that anywhere else but Los Angeles. And I occasionally still, like, there'll be a moment that hits me. There's a movie about Hollywood, a not good movie by Robert Aldrich's sort of follow up after
Baby Jane.
After Baby Jane, and that was a movie called The Legend of Lila Clare with Kim Novak, which I think everybody agrees was a kind of a debacle. But there is a sequence of it where Kim Novak walks along Hollywood Boulevard, and every storefront, every theater that she passes is like a kind of shockwave out of my childhood. That movie was on TCM, and I watched 5 minutes of it about 10 times, just to kind of reconnect with that.
Real strong sense of place. Cameron, how did you come to the movie part of it, the classic movie part of it?
Well, I grew up watching movies constantly. I was obsessed with movies, and I did have an early exposure to both theater and music, but I also grew up in a fairly remote community on the coast, and that didn't have a lot of people, didn't have a lot of things going on, and sort of way for me to kind of get an understanding of the wider world was through watching movies, which I did pretty religiously from the time I was about 5 years old onward. And, I grew up, I was born in the 1980s. I grew up in the 1990s. So my contemporary experience was, a lot of the independent film movement, which I found fascinating. And then also movies going back to the 70s, 60s, 50s, and then way back into pre-code Hollywood and, the beginnings of the talking movie era. Turner Classic Movies, things like that. Local video stores, back when those were still around. We had several within, maybe a 20-minute radius from my house. And I used to just go there and rent as many movies as I could and watch everything that I could get my hands on. So theater and music kind of took my interest as things that, topics that as a writer I was more interested in for years and still am. But film was always kind of a first love of mine, and really kind of how I initially came to connect with art.
Do you have a favorite contemporary film director?
A favorite contemporary film director?
Mm.
Honestly, that's kind of a hard question because
It
I
is.
I don't see a lot of movies, maybe under normal circumstances because I don't have the time because I'm reviewing theater 5 or 6
Yeah.
nights a week. I
How about a
really
classic one? A
well,
classic film director?
a classic film director. I absolutely love Douglas Sirk.
Mhm.
I absolutely love Nicholas Ray. Billy Wilder, obviously Sunset Boulevard. It's probably one of my all-time favorite films. As far as contemporary directors go, I've loved all of the Greta Gerwig films. I really
Mhm.
loved Little Women,
Yeah.
and Lady Bird, and I really have a lot of affinity for Paul Thomas Anderson, who I think is kind of fascinating in moving that kind of Altman-esque style forward into the contemporary times. I, I'm I'm a Coen Brothers fan, but
Me too.
under sadly under normal circumstances now I maybe see like 5 movies a year,
Mhm.
because I just am if I'm not writing if I'm not writing, I'm seeing something, and when the thing you're not writing about when the thing you're writing about is not movies, you just don't have a ton of time.
Mhm. Did you ever think about being an actor, David?
No, I think I really didn't. No, actually, that's not quite right. If your
No.
father's an actor, you sort of think about it in some ways, but I didn't. I
Yeah.
don't. I thought about being a director, theater
Mhm.
director. I wouldn't even begin to know film directing, which I think is a very complicated art. Um, I think I always had a sense that somehow I was more interested in the sort of moving things around and figuring out solutions to that kind of a problem than I was
Mhm.
in terms of acting. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in my life around actors, and so I understand actor vocabulary. I'm interested in how actors think. But part of the appeal of being a director would be to work with actors,
Mhm.
and to help them. It's to let them sort of do better but realize in a better way what I would like sort of the two of us to come up with together.
To solve
Yeah,
problems.
yeah.
But you've designed music, right? Have you not designed music for productions or
Yes,
been
I
involved?
have even a bit of professional stuff. That's I still love to do that. I wish there was. I mean, there's really not much of a job in that, I would
Mhm.
say. But yes, I love doing it as a director. I've directed productions at Penn, and as a director, actually, one of my favorite things to do, and it's one of the most solitary parts of this, is to conceive of a production with kind of music, with the music around it. And I remember actually directing a production of Curse of the Starving Class and trying a couple of different musical pieces to open it, and realizing that you could kind of completely control how an audience was going to respond to this very odd piece, which in some ways I think is a broad farce, and in other ways is one of the darkest plays I know. You could essentially, by choosing one particular music, get people into
Mhm.
one mode or another, in which they expected one thing or another. And I sort of loved that degree of manipulation. People
Mhm.
weren't aware that they were being manipulated, but you could sort of
Mhm.
figure it out.
Can really set the
Yeah.
stage. So Cameron, if you weren't writing, and is there any other aspect of the theater or film that you might see yourself
I,
conceivably working in?
I don't know. I mean, I have, you know, I have wanted to be a writer and a journalist since I was probably like 7 years old. I have done some, when I was a kid, I was drawn to the theater from the first time that I saw a play, which was when I think I was 4 years old. And even though I did grow up in a fairly remote area, there actually was a professional theater in the town where I grew up. And, you know, my parents, I think, did what a lot of people who have children who are interested in the theater did, which was put me in classes to get a feel for it. And I did actually do a play when I was about 12 years old, a professional production, which I didn't enjoy as an actor. So I kind of checked that off the list pretty quickly, you know, that I didn't want to be an actor. I didn't like the repetition of it. I didn't like,
Yeah, yeah. What aspects just this having to do the same thing over and over
well, you
again,
know,
having
I
to
mean, if you're in a fairly long run, which this was, it was like close to 2 months of performances. You're, you know, 8 times a week, go to the
Mhm.
theater, go through the same rituals, do the show. You know, you can play around a little bit, but you can't really,
Yeah.
you can't really change that much. It's the same script, and you don't want to screw up anybody else's show. So even at 12 years old, I kind of got the sense that like this isn't really what is satisfying to me. And you know, there's so many other people who are like, this is it for them. So like, I didn't
Mhm.
really want to take that spot away from anybody else. Um, Whereas, I mean, every time you sit down to write a review, I think is a new challenge, or an article or an essay, whatever. Every time, you know, you see 6 shows in a week, you see 6 different shows that provide 6 different challenges, and you've got to think about it from all these different perspectives. Because you're not going to review a play by Chekhov the same way that you're going to review a play that's written today by a living artist writing about a specific community or a specific issue.
Mhm.
So I love the variation and the challenge that comes from writing. And
Yeah.
honestly, if I didn't write about the arts, I don't know if I would have another. I didn't know if I would have another job within the arts, but I think I would always write.
Cameron's reminding me of, I should say, I can give you my one sort of acting credit, which was a production of St. Joan when I was at UCLA, a student at UCLA, and I played the steward in the first scene and the soldier in the last scene. And it was an uncut, very long, rather sort of filled with stage effects production. And mostly I thought, I actually didn't mind the repetition of it, but I thought there's that nagging 3 hours in the middle where I'm doing nothing except sitting there and listening to like what other people are doing. And I thought, well, this is forget this. And this is like, I'm
That's the
actually
part
in a
where you read a
play,
book,
right? This
Dave.
is, I've got a job. I actually got a
Yeah.
job. And
Right.
I thought, no, this is not for me.
Well, that's a challenge, right? That
Yeah.
big section in the middle there where you have to keep your energy up. Does it give you, do you ever think about that? Like, wow, this is the 9 millionth performance of this show this person has done. And does it harken back to the idea of like, wow, I have to do this thing every night, but to make it fresh, you
Well,
know?
so, you know, I've said this, I've used almost exactly this phrase to describe something that that I greatly admire about, I think that the truly great actors have, which is, I remember going to see Judi Dench in Amy's View in London near the end of the run on a rainy weeknight. And as much as that show became kind of a huge deal and was, you know, probably on Broadway, I think had, you know, very significant box office, it was half empty. I was just sort of was there. And, you know, quiet. And you would think her entire life depended on what she was doing on that stage that night, that she had never done it before, that she, you know, and I thought, well,
She's doing it for you.
that's art. I mean, that's, yeah.
Cameron, when you were in New York, you were at Manhattan Marymount, right?
I went to college in New York. Yes.
In New York, yeah. Did you go to theater when you were there?
I went to theater constantly. You know, one of the best things about going to school in New York, especially, you know, 15 years ago, availability, cheap tickets, free tickets, beyond off Broadway, you know, holes in the wall. You know, there was any night of the week, there were 20 things that you could be seeing. And I saw everything that I could possibly see, from the biggest Broadway shows down to like the most intimate off Broadway shows where there were 5 people in the audience. really, that formed, and it still forms, a huge part of my knowledge base. For the 5 years that I lived in New York when I was a student, going to see as much theater and live performance and music as possible. And obviously, if you live in a city like New York where there's a lot of performance going on, whenever you live there, that's going to be, you're going to be seeing what's playing at the time. So, my experience, I still, right up until the theaters closed 6 months ago, I was still seeing a fairly significant amount of theater in New York, as well as in Philadelphia and in other cities around the country. But, when I was in the theater, when I was living in New York, going to the theater all the time, I really tried to take advantage and see the biggest cross section of theater that I could as well.
Did you write about it back then? Would you write about it even if you weren't writing for someone?
I didn't start to write about theater in earnest until probably until I was after college. But I sort of had the mindset already that writing about theater was probably something that I wanted to do professionally.
What is on tap for you all coming up? Your next couple projects for Reclining Standards and Parterre?
Well, we are still writing about Bette Davis, and we're actually going to be writing about All About Eve next, but we're not just going to be writing about All About Eve. We're going to be looking, and this was a suggestion from our editor at Parterre, who is a big, as David mentioned, sort of very knowledgeable about film, and especially about film from sort of that golden age of Hollywood. We're going to be looking at several films that from that era that focus on kind of the theater world.
Yeah. Including two, actually, I think we'll probably end up doing at least All About Eve plus at least three. And all three of them are movies that I actually had not known, never even known existed really until we started writing. One of the ones that I'm hoping to do is we wrote about Morning Glory, which is a Katherine Hepburn film based on a play about a young actress coming to New York, and there is a remake of that's pretty obscure at this point with Susan Strasberg, and I believe it may not be his very first movie, but the billing for Christopher Plummer is "And Introducing." So it's Christopher Plummer, Henry Fonda, Susan Strasberg, kind of an interesting cast across the board, and all of these really sort of explore, All About Eve certainly, the milieu of Broadway theater. And I think they all do it in ways that are somewhat similar, but also different. Mm-hmm. And I would say with a considerable range of success across these four movies. So that'll be fun.
And, we try to write at least one, article a week. So we have a lot of stuff that we haven't gotten around to yet. That we will, and a lot more sort of series that we have in mind, different directors, different actors. So stay tuned.
Well, thank you for keeping it just rich and fun and just a huge history, acting, design lesson every week. It's been really a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing, really, it's been so great. And thanks for coming on today and sharing your thoughts. And we have links in the box over there for everybody to follow David and Cameron's writing if you are not already doing so. So thank you guys.
And can I just say, please send us suggestions for movies to do. As I say, as Cameron mentioned, these two movies that were suggested by James Jordan took me down a very fun rabbit hole that I truly would not have known existed without it. So
yes, we would love to. If there's anybody who has requests, we'd love to hear them.
Sure.
And they can find you all. Just there's a way to get to you guys, right?
Through our website,
Reclining Standards.
You can send an email to you. Okay, terrific. Well, I look very forward to seeing the work to come. You guys, thank you so much for being on today, and
thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks to you, everybody, for being on with us here today at Fringe Show #1. We'll be back next week at 5 p.m. on Saturday with playwright Jacqueline Goldfinger, and she has a lot to talk about, work that is happening. She is working on so many different projects on different levels right now, working on an opera project. She has a project that will be coming to New York in 2021, and at the Kennedy Center, and there's a lot happening. She is an associate professor, or a visiting professor of theater at UC Davis, and a lot to come on board with that, as well as her being a mom, so lots happening there. So we'll be here each week during the Fringe Festival for you at Saturdays at 5 p.m. with guests to come. If you're on the IRC's mailing list, you'll get an email from us. If not, go over to the IRC's website and join us there, and you can always catch past episodes on the IRC's YouTube page. So thanks so much for being here. We look forward to hopefully seeing you next Saturday at 5 p.m. And we are just wishing you a very safe and a very healthy week ahead.